Chapter 1, Traces of the Awakening. Deep within uncharted space, the exploration ship Aurora descended through the dense atmosphere of a nameless planet. The metallic hull vibrated as it pushed through the thick, alien clouds. This planet had no name, no place on any known star map. Yet here, buried beneath the shifting sands and ancient stone, were the traces of a civilization long forgotten. Dr. Mara Lawson stared out of the viewport, her breath catching as she caught sight of it, the monolith. Rising from the desert floor, half buried in the crimson sands, was a massive structure, a fusion of stone and metal, etched with symbols and carvings that seemed to whisper secrets to those who gazed upon them. "There it is," Mira murmured, her voice a mix of awe and anticipation. "The traces of Genesis, they might be here." The rest of the Aurora team gathered around, awe falling over them. For 5 long years, they had scoured the galaxy for remnants of ancient civilizations, but never had they encountered something as monumental as this. If this monolith was indeed part of the legendary Genesis, it would be one of the greatest discoveries in human history. As the team disembarked from the ship, a cold wind greeted them, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. The monolith was even larger than Mira had anticipated. Its surface was smooth, almost unnaturally so, yet the symbols carved into it seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light, as though imbued with a power that defied time itself. "Spread out and start the scans," Mara ordered, her voice steady but her mind racing. "We need to document everything." The team moved with practiced efficiency, setting up equipment around the monolith, their sensors and scanners sweeping across the ancient structure. Mara knelt beside one of the carvings, tracing her fingers over the strange, shifting patterns. The symbols were unlike anything she had ever seen, fluid, as if they were alive, constantly rearranging themselves into new forms and shapes. "There's something different about this," Dr. Jonas Reeve, the team's linguist, muttered as he examined the symbols on a nearby surface. "These carvings, they're not just writing. They're changing." Mira nodded, her brow furrowing in concentration. "It's like the monolith is reacting to us, or maybe to something we've brought with us." As the scans continued, the atmosphere around the team seemed to grow heavier, the very air thick with anticipation. The monolith, once silent and still, now seemed to hum with a low, resonant frequency, vibrating just beneath the range of human hearing. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, as if the planet itself was awakening. Dr. Lawson, one of the technicians, called out, his voice tinged with unease. "We're picking up something unusual." Mira hurried over to the technician's station, her eyes scanning the data streaming across the screen. The readings were unlike anything she had ever seen, pulses of energy, rhythmic and precise, emanating from deep within the monolith. "It's a signal," she realized, her heart pounding in her chest. "A beacon of some sort. But what is it trying to communicate?" Dr. Reeve asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mira stared at the monolith, the realization dawning on her that whatever lay buried here, whatever secrets this ancient structure held, it was far from dormant. The traces of Genesis had not just been found, they had been awakened. Chapter 2, The Race Begins. The Aurora team worked tirelessly, setting up their base of operations around the monolith. The once quiet atmosphere had become a hub of activity, with scanners, analysis tools, and communication arrays all focused on the ancient structure. The team's initial excitement had quickly transformed into a deep sense of urgency as they realized the true magnitude of their discovery. Dr. Mara Lawson stood in front of the command console, her mind racing with possibilities. The signal emanating from the monolith was growing stronger, more insistent, as if it was trying to communicate something vital. But what? And why now, after countless millennia of silence? Any progress on decoding the signal? Mira asked, turning to Dr. Jonas Reeve, who was hunched over a terminal, his eyes fixed on the complex patterns of data streaming across the screen. "It's like nothing I've ever seen," Reeve replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "The symbols on the monolith are part of it, but there's another layer, something beneath the surface. It's almost like a code within a code. It's going to take time to unravel." Mira nodded, her thoughts drifting to the ancient civilization that had created this monolith. What secrets had they buried here, and why? As she pondered these questions, a faint signal crackled over the comms, pulling her back to the present. Dr. Lawson, you need to hear this, the voice of one of the technicians crackled through the comm link. Mira hurried over to the communications station, where the technician was replaying a transmission intercepted from deep space. The message was fragmented, barely coherent, but the words that came through were enough to send a chill down her spine. Approaching, unknown forces. Genesis. Myra's heart skipped a beat. Play it again, she ordered, leaning closer to the console. The technician replayed the message, and this time the fragments were slightly clearer. Someone or something was coming, and they were heading straight for the planet. Who could it be? Reeve asked, joining her at the console. Another exploration team? Or worse, Mira replied, her voice grave. It could be someone who knows exactly what we found here. The realization hit them both simultaneously. They were not alone in this discovery. Somewhere out there, another force was converging on the monolith, and their intentions were far from friendly. We need to prepare, Mira said, her mind racing. If they're after the Genesis technology, we can't let them get their hands on it. We need to secure the site and figure out what this monolith is trying to tell us before they arrive. Reeve nodded, already moving to relay the orders to the rest of the team. I'll double the security protocols and get the drones in the air. We need to establish a perimeter. As the team moved into high alert, Mira couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. This wasn't just a race against time, it was a race against an unknown enemy who might already have the upper hand. The message had been clear: Genesis was the key, and whoever controlled it would hold unimaginable power. The atmosphere around the monolith grew even more charged as the team worked feverishly to unlock its secrets. Every hour brought them closer to understanding the ancient structure, but also closer to the arrival of whoever or whatever was on their way. Mira stared at the monolith, its symbols glowing faintly in the twilight. The once silent artifact now seemed alive with a purpose of its own, as if guiding them towards something far greater and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. As night fell, the first distant lights appeared on the horizon, and Mira knew that the race for Genesis had truly begun. Chapter 3: An Unexpected Ally. The night was thick with tension as the distant lights on the horizon grew closer. The Aurora team was on high alert, their makeshift camp fortified with automated defense systems and surveillance drones. The air was heavy with the sense of impending confrontation, but Dr. Mira Lawson knew they couldn't afford to lose focus. Whatever was coming for them, they had to be ready. Status report, Mira called out as she entered the command tent, where Dr. Jonas Reeve and the rest of the team were huddled over various monitors. The unidentified vessels are still on an intercept course, Reeve reported, his eyes fixed on the screen displaying the approaching objects. They'll be within visual range in less than 10 minutes. No response to our hails. Myra's mind raced. If these were indeed hostile forces, they needed to secure the monolith and its secrets at all costs. What's the status of the monolith? Have we made any progress decoding the signal? Reeve shook his head. We've barely scratched the surface. The signal is incredibly complex, multiple layers of encryption, and the symbols are still shifting. It's like the monolith is alive, reacting to us. Mira nodded, her gaze drifting to the monolith, which loomed ominously in the distance, its surface glowing faintly in the darkness. Keep working on it. We need to understand what it's trying to tell us. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and a low rumble echoed through the air. The lights on the horizon had multiplied, and now they were close enough to make out the distinct shapes of spacecraft, sleek, angular vessels that bore no resemblance to any known human design. Get ready, Mira ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The team scrambled into position, weapons at the ready, as the first of the ships descended from the sky. But just as the Aurora team braced for the worst, something unexpected happened. One of the ships broke away from the others, moving at an impossibly fast speed. It swooped low over the monolith, its sleek form barely visible in the darkness, and then it stopped, hovering just above the ground. Mira felt a wave of confusion and suspicion. This was no ordinary maneuver. What were they doing? Before she could react, a figure emerged from the ship, descending gracefully to the ground. The figure was humanoid in shape, clad in a suit of advanced armor that shimmered with a metallic sheen. As it approached the monolith, the symbols on the ancient structure began to glow brighter, as if responding to the newcomer's presence. "Who are you?" Mira called out, her voice tinged with both authority and curiosity. The figure paused, then removed its helmet, revealing a face that was both familiar and alien. The being's features were sharp and angular, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. It looked almost human, but there was something unmistakably otherworldly about it. "I am called Kalen," the being spoke, its voice smooth and resonant, carrying an air of ancient wisdom. "I come not as an enemy, but as an ally. I am here to help you unlock the secrets of Genesis." Mira exchanged a quick glance with Reeve, who was just as bewildered as she was. "Why should we trust you?" she asked, her voice firm. Kalen's gaze shifted to the monolith, its symbols now pulsing in a steady rhythm. "Because I am the last of those who created this," he said, his tone filled with a mix of pride and sorrow. "The knowledge of Genesis is too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. But with your help, we can unlock its true potential for the benefit of all." Mira hesitated, torn between suspicion and the sense that Kalen was telling the truth. There was no denying the connection between him and the monolith. It was as if they were two parts of a whole, resonating with the same energy. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice wary. Kalen's expression softened. "Nothing more than to see this knowledge used wisely. The enemies who pursue you, they seek only power and destruction. I offer you the chance to understand, to control, and to protect what remains of Genesis." The rest of the ships had landed now, and the air was thick with the hum of engines and the tension of a potential standoff. Mira knew she was out of options. She could either trust this mysterious ally or risk everything by facing their enemies alone. "All right," Mira said finally, lowering her weapon but keeping her guard up. "We'll work together. But know this, if you betray us, there will be consequences." Kalen inclined his head in a gesture of respect. "I would expect nothing less." With that, the alliance was forged, and the real race for Genesis began. Together, they would delve deeper into the monolith's secrets, all while preparing to face the dangers that lay ahead. But even as Mira agreed to this partnership, she couldn't shake the feeling that Kalen was hiding something that could change everything. Chapter 4: The Lost City. The first rays of dawn painted the horizon with hues of amber and crimson, casting elongated shadows across the barren landscape. The monolith stood tall and enigmatic, its surface now shimmering with a subtle luminescence that seemed to echo the rising sun. The eerie glow highlighted the intricate patterns etched into its surface, revealing layers of detail previously unnoticed. Dr. Mira Lawson watched as Kalen moved gracefully around the monolith, his hands hovering just above its surface. He whispered in a language unfamiliar to any human ear, and with each utterance, the symbols responded, shifting, aligning, and pulsating in synchronization with his words. "Fascinating," Dr. Jonas Reeve muttered beside Mira, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's as if he's communicating directly with it." Mira nodded, her skepticism tempered by the undeniable connection unfolding before her. Despite her initial distrust, Kalen's presence had already yielded progress they couldn't have achieved alone. "How long has it been since you've interacted with this technology?" Mira asked, approaching Kalen cautiously. Kalen paused, turning his gaze toward her. His eyes held a depth that spoke of ages past and experiences beyond human comprehension. "Time flows differently for my kind," he replied softly. "But by your measurements, it has been eons since these halls echoed with life." "Halls?" Reeve interjected, picking up on the implication. "Are you saying there's more beneath us?" A hint of a smile played on Kalen's lips. He extended his hand toward the base of the monolith, and as he did, the ground trembled subtly. The sand and dust began to shift, swirling away to reveal a massive, ornate doorway embedded within the structure. "Welcome to the heart of Genesis," Kalen announced, his voice reverent. "The gateway to the lost city." Mira exchanged a glance with Reeve, excitement and trepidation swirling within her. This was beyond anything they had anticipated, a hidden city, potentially untouched for millennia, lying beneath their very feet. "Prepare the team," Mira ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We're going in." Within the hour, the Aurora team had assembled at the newly revealed entrance, equipped with advanced scanning equipment, protective suits, and illumination devices. The anticipation was palpable as they stood before the colossal doors, which were adorned with intricate carvings depicting celestial bodies in abstract forms that defied immediate comprehension. Talon stepped forward, placing both palms flat against the cold surface. Light cascaded from his hands, tracing the engravings and illuminating hidden pathways within the metal. A deep, resonant hum filled the air as the doors began to part, releasing a gust of cool, stale air from the depths below. Mira took a deep breath, her senses heightened. Stay alert and proceed with caution. We don't know what awaits us inside. The team advanced slowly, their footsteps echoing through the vast corridor that unfolded before them. The walls were constructed of a material unlike anything they'd seen, smooth and reflective, yet seemingly organic in nature. Bioluminescent veins ran through the structure, casting a soft, ethereal glow that illuminated their path. As they ventured deeper, the corridor opened into an expansive chamber that took their breath away. Towering structures spiraled upward, connected by delicate bridges and suspended pathways. The architecture was both alien and breathtakingly beautiful, a harmonious blend of art and technology that transcended human understanding. Unbelievable, Reeve whispered, his voice echoing in the vastness. This place, it's a masterpiece. Talon observed their reactions with a serene expression. This city was once the pinnacle of knowledge and innovation. A sanctuary where the brightest minds converged to unlock the mysteries of the universe. Myra's gaze swept across the chamber, noting the dormant consoles and crystalline structures that dotted the landscape. What happened to it? Why was it abandoned? Talon's expression darkened, shadows crossing his features. Ambition can be a double-edged sword. The pursuit of ultimate power led to conflicts that tore our civilization apart. In the end, we chose to seal away our greatest achievements to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. A sudden crackle over the comms interrupted the moment. Dr. Lawson, we're detecting movement above ground, one of the technicians reported urgently. Multiple unidentified entities approaching our location. Myra's eyes narrowed. How long until they reach us? 15 minutes, maybe less. They're moving fast. Talon's demeanor shifted instantly, his posture tense. They found us sooner than expected. We must act quickly. Who are they? Reeve asked, concern evident in his voice. Seekers, Talon replied grimly. Descendants of those who once sought to misuse Genesis's power. They've spent millennia searching for this place, and now that it's been awakened, they'll stop at nothing to claim it. Myra's mind raced as she assessed the situation. They were deep within an ancient, unfamiliar city with hostile forces closing in rapidly. Retreating wasn't an option, they needed to secure whatever advantage they could find here. Is there anything in this city that can help us defend ourselves? She asked, turning to Talon. He nodded, gesturing toward a series of dormant structures lining the chamber walls. The city's defense systems lie dormant but intact. With time, I can reactivate them. Time we don't have, Reeve interjected anxiously. Mira considered their options swiftly. Split into teams. Talon, take Reeve and whoever you need to get those defenses online. The rest of us will prepare to hold them off as long as possible. Talon hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding decisively. Follow me. As Talon and his team sprinted toward the defense modules, Mira rallied the remaining members, coordinating their positions and strategies. They set up makeshift barricades at key choke points, deploying what limited weaponry they had brought with them. The comms buzzed again. Incoming. They've breached the surface perimeter. Mira gripped her weapon tightly, her heart pounding. The faint sounds of distant footsteps and alien chatter echoed through the corridors, growing louder with each passing moment. Hold your positions, she commanded, her voice steady. We protect this place and its secrets at all costs. Suddenly, shadows flickered at the edge of the chamber, and figures emerged, tall, imposing beings clad in dark, ornate armor, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They moved with predatory grace, weapons at the ready, exuding an aura of ruthless determination. The lead seeker stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Mira. A chilling smile curled his lips as he spoke in a deep, resonant voice. You have something that belongs to us. Mira met his gaze unflinchingly. This knowledge doesn't belong to anyone, especially not those who would abuse it. The Seeker's smile widened. Brave words for someone so outmatched. A tense silence hung in the air as both sides assessed each other, the weight of impending conflict pressing down upon them. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, the Seeker raised his hand, and a blast of energy shot toward Mira. She dodged swiftly, the beam scorching the ground where she had stood moments before. Open fire! Mira shouted, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Blasts of energy and gunfire filled the air as the Aurora team engaged the Seekers, the sound of battle echoing through the ancient halls. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the team fought valiantly, using the environment to their advantage and holding their ground against the relentless assault. Amidst the chaos, a low hum began to resonate through the chamber, growing in intensity. Mira glanced toward the source and saw that the dormant structures Kalen had approached were now coming to life, emitting pulses of brilliant light. A powerful energy shield materialized, encasing the chamber and pushing the Seekers back with a forceful surge. The sudden shift in the battle's momentum gave the Aurora team a much-needed respite. Kalen's voice echoed over the comms. The defenses are online, but they won't hold them off forever. We must secure the core of the city before it's too late. Mira nodded, signaling her team to regroup. Fall back. We're moving deeper into the city. As they retreated through the labyrinthine corridors, the city's lights began to activate around them, illuminating pathways and revealing more of the lost city's splendor. Yet, despite the temporary protection, Mira knew that the true challenge lay ahead. They needed to unlock the full potential of Genesis, not just to defend themselves, but to prevent the immense power from falling into the wrong hands. Trusting Kalen was a risk, but it was one they had to take if they were to have any hope of succeeding. As they pressed forward into the unknown depths, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that the city's awakening was only the beginning and that the true test of their resolve and unity was yet to come. Chapter 5: Dark Truths. The air grew colder and denser as the Aurora team ventured deeper into the lost city. The ethereal glow of the bioluminescent veins that lined the walls was their only guide, casting long, wavering shadows across the ancient stone. The atmosphere was heavy with a sense of foreboding, as if the city itself was alive, watching their every move. Dr. Mira Lawson led the way, her mind racing with questions. Who were these Seekers, and why were they so desperate to claim Genesis? And more importantly, what was Kalen not telling them? Despite his assistance, there was an air of secrecy about him that Mira couldn't shake. As they moved through the labyrinthine corridors, the architecture around them grew more intricate and alien. Symbols and carvings on the walls became increasingly abstract, almost hypnotic in their complexity. It was as if the deeper they went, the further they strayed from the familiar and into the truly unknown. Dr. Lawson, you need to see this, Dr. Jonas Reeves' voice crackled over the comms, pulling Mira from her thoughts. Mira quickened her pace, joining Reeve and the others in a large chamber that had just come into view. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. The room was dominated by a massive structure, a towering spire of crystal and metal that pulsed with a deep, rhythmic light. It was connected to the city's core by a network of conduits that ran like veins through the walls and floor. This must be the city's central power source, Reeve said, his voice tinged with awe. But it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Mira approached the spire cautiously, her eyes scanning the intricate patterns that adorned its surface. The symbols here were different from those on the monolith above ground, more fluid, more chaotic. As she reached out to touch the surface, a jolt of energy surged through her, sending a sharp pain up her arm. She pulled back, her hand trembling. There's something wrong about this place. Before Reeve could respond, Kalen appeared at the entrance to the chamber, his expression unreadable. You're correct, Dr. Lawson, he said quietly. This city, this technology, it was not just a sanctuary. It was also a prison. Mira turned to him, her eyes narrowing. A prison? For what? Kalen hesitated, his gaze shifting to the pulsating spire. For a power that should never have been unleashed. My people, in their pursuit of knowledge, created Genesis, a technology capable of altering reality itself. But with that power came unimaginable consequences. He stepped closer to the spire, his expression darkening. The Seekers are descendants of those who sought to harness Genesis for their own ends. When they realized the true cost of that power, they tried to stop us, leading to a war that nearly destroyed our civilization. In the end, we chose to seal away Genesis and the city, hoping it would never be found. Mira felt a chill run down her spine. And now that it's been found, they're back to finish what they started. Talon nodded gravely. Yes. But they do not seek to destroy Genesis, they wish to use it to control it. If they succeed, they will reshape the universe in their image, bending reality to their will. Reeve looked from Talon to the spire, his face pale. Then why bring us here? If this power is so dangerous, why not destroy it? Because it cannot be destroyed, Talon replied, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. Genesis is a force of nature, a fundamental part of the universe. The only way to protect it and ourselves is to control it to ensure it does not fall into the wrong hands. Mira took a deep breath, her mind reeling from the enormity of what they had uncovered. They weren't just dealing with an ancient civilization's legacy, they were facing a power that could alter the fabric of reality itself. We need to secure this place, she said, her voice firm. If the Seekers get their hands on Genesis. Talon's gaze hardened. They won't. I will ensure it. But as he spoke, the ground beneath them trembled violently, and a deep, resonant hum filled the chamber. The lights within the spire flared, and the conduits running through the city began to pulse with a blinding intensity. What's happening? Reeve shouted over the rising noise. The city is awakening, Talon replied, his voice tense. The presence of so many within its halls has triggered the Genesis protocol. The power is surging. If we don't stabilize it, the entire city could be torn apart. Myra's heart raced as she tried to think. They were running out of time. How do we stop it? Talon hesitated for the briefest of moments before responding. There is a failsafe deep within the core, a chamber where the Genesis energy is stored. If we can reach it, we can stabilize the power, but we will need to work quickly. Mira nodded, signaling for the team to follow Talon. As they raced through the winding corridors, the city's lights pulsed erratically, casting twisted shadows that danced on the walls. The hum grew louder, more chaotic, and Mira could feel the very air vibrating with the raw energy that threatened to tear the city apart. Finally, they reached a massive, circular chamber at the heart of the city. In the center stood a platform, surrounded by columns of swirling energy. The air crackled with electricity, and Mira could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. There. Talon pointed to the platform. We need to access the controls and divert the energy flow. Reeve and the other technicians quickly set to work, their hands moving swiftly over the alien consoles. As they worked, Mira watched Talon closely. There was a determination in his eyes, but also something else, a flicker of fear, or perhaps guilt. What aren't you telling us? She demanded, stepping closer to him. Talon's gaze met hers, and for a moment, he seemed to weigh his response. Genesis was our greatest achievement, he said softly. But it was also our greatest failure. The energy that powers this city, it is alive, in a sense. It is conscious, and it seeks to expand, to grow. If we do not contain it, it will consume everything in its path. Mira felt her blood run cold. You're saying this isn't just a technology, it's a living entity? Talon nodded solemnly. And it is far more powerful than you can imagine. We created it, but we could not control it. That is why it was sealed away. Myra's mind reeled. They were not just dealing with an ancient power, they were dealing with a sentient force, one that had the potential to reshape the universe in its image. As the technicians continued to work, the columns of energy around the platform began to stabilize, their chaotic movements slowing to a steady pulse. But just as it seemed they were gaining control, the chamber shook with a violent tremor, and a deafening roar echoed through the city. The Seekers have breached the defenses, a voice shouted over the comms. They're heading straight for the core. Myra's heart pounded in her chest. They were out of time. We need to hold them off until the stabilization is complete. Prepare for battle. As the team braced for the coming onslaught, Mira knew they were facing impossible odds. But she also knew that they couldn't afford to fail. The fate of the city, and perhaps the universe, rested on their shoulders. And in the depths of the lost city, the dark truths of Genesis were beginning to awaken. Chapter 6: The Battle for Genesis. The air in the central chamber was charged with energy, crackling with the intensity of the struggle unfolding within the heart of the lost city. The hum of the Genesis core filled the room, vibrating through the walls and echoing in the minds of everyone present. The team had managed to stabilize the core, but the threat was far from over. The Seekers were closing in, their footsteps reverberating through the ancient halls as they approached the chamber. Dr. Mira Lawson stood at the edge of the platform, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the distant sounds of combat echoing through the corridors, blasts of energy weapons, the clash of metal, and the shouts of her team as they fought to hold back the oncoming tide. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and their position was becoming increasingly untenable. "Reeve, how much longer do you need?" Mira shouted over the noise, her eyes scanning the chaotic scene around her. Dr. Jonas Reeve was hunched over one of the alien consoles, his fingers moving rapidly across the controls. "We're almost there," he called back, his voice strained. "Just a few more minutes and we'll have the core fully stabilized." "We don't have a few minutes." Mira snapped, her gaze flicking to the entrance of the chamber, where the first of the Seekers appeared, tall, imposing figures clad in dark armor, their eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. The Seekers moved with deadly precision, their weapons trained on the Aurora team as they advanced. Mira raised her own weapon, firing a burst of energy that struck one of the Seekers in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. But for every Seeker that fell, two more seemed to take their place. "We need to fall back," one of the team members shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. "We can't hold them off much longer." "Hold your ground," Mira commanded, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "We need to buy Reeve as much time as we can." The team formed a defensive line, using the alien consoles and equipment as cover as they fought to repel the advancing Seekers. Blasts of energy lit up the chamber, casting eerie shadows across the walls as the battle raged on. The ground shook with the force of the conflict, and Mira could feel the tension in the air, the sense that everything was teetering on the brink of destruction. Talon moved through the chaos with a grace and agility that defied his humanoid form. His armor shimmered with a metallic sheen as he engaged the Seekers, his movements fluid and precise. He fought not just with weapons but with a deep, resonant power that seemed to emanate from within him, a power that mirrored the energy of the Genesis core itself. "You must hold them off a little longer," Talon shouted, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "The core is nearly stable. If we can contain the energy, we can use it to repel the Seekers." Mira nodded, her mind racing as she considered their options. They were fighting a losing battle, there were too many Seekers, and they were too well equipped. But if they could stabilize the core and harness its energy, they might be able to turn the tide. "Reeve, we're running out of time," Mira called out, her voice laced with urgency. Reeve's fingers flew over the controls, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Almost there," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the noise. The ground beneath them trembled violently, and a low, ominous hum filled the air. The light from the Genesis core flared, blindingly bright, and Mira felt a surge of energy wash over her, a raw, primal force that seemed to resonate with every fiber of her being. "Now!" Talon shouted, his voice commanding. "Activate the failsafe." Reeve slammed his hand down on the console, and the entire chamber was bathed in a blinding light. The energy from the Genesis core surged outward, expanding in a shockwave that swept through the chamber and beyond, knocking the Seekers off their feet and sending them crashing to the ground. The shockwave rippled through the city, passing through walls and barriers as if they were nothing. The entire structure trembled under the force of the energy, and for a moment, it seemed as if the city itself might collapse under the strain. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light dimmed, and the energy receded, leaving the chamber in an eerie, almost oppressive silence. Mira blinked, her vision slowly adjusting to the dim light. The Seekers lay scattered across the chamber, their bodies still and motionless. The Aurora team was on their feet, their expressions a mix of shock and relief as they took in the scene around them. Did we do it?" one of the team members asked, his voice shaky. Talon stepped forward, his eyes scanning the chamber. "The core is stable," he said, his voice calm but tinged with exhaustion. "The energy has been contained." Mira let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "We bought ourselves some time," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "But we're not out of the woods yet. The Seekers will regroup, and they'll be back." Reeve approached, his face pale and drawn. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "We barely made it through that if they come back in force." Mira nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We need to find a way to disable their ships, to cut off their reinforcements. If we can neutralize their fleet, we might have a chance to hold this place." Talon's gaze shifted to the far side of the chamber, where a series of dormant consoles lined the walls. "There is another way," he said, his voice thoughtful. "The city's defense systems are powerful, but there is a weapon, a last resort, designed to protect Genesis from those who would misuse it." Myra's eyes narrowed. "What kind of weapon?" Talon hesitated for a moment before responding. "A pulse and energy wave that can disable any technology within a certain radius. It was designed to protect the city, to prevent it from being captured. But it comes with a cost." "What kind of cost?" Reeve asked, his voice wary. Talon's expression was somber. "The pulse would not discriminate between friend and foe. It would disable everything, our ships, our weapons, even the city's systems. It would leave us vulnerable, but it would stop the Seekers in their tracks." Mira considered the implications. The pulse could give them the advantage they needed, but it would also leave them defenseless. It was a gamble, a risky, desperate gamble, but it might be their only shot at survival. "We'll need to get everyone inside the city walls before we activate it," Mira said finally. "And we'll need to be prepared for what comes next." Talon nodded, his expression resolute. "It is a risk, but one worth taking. The Seekers cannot be allowed to control Genesis." Mira turned to her team, her voice firm. "Get ready to move out. We're going to activate the pulse and end this, one way or another." As the team prepared to execute the plan, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something far greater than any of them had anticipated. The battle for Genesis was far from over, and the decisions they made in the coming hours would determine the fate of not just the lost city, but perhaps the entire universe. With renewed determination, they moved out, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 7: The Pulse of Genesis. The cold, dimly lit corridors of the lost city seemed to stretch on endlessly as Dr. Mira Lawson led her team deeper into its ancient heart. The faint hum of the Genesis core was ever present, a reminder of the raw, untamed power they were dealing with. The echoes of the recent battle still hung in the air, a stark reminder of the relentless threat posed by the Seekers. Myra's mind raced as they approached the control center that housed the city's last resort weapon, the energy pulse that could disable all technology within its reach. It was a dangerous gamble, one that could either save them or doom them all. Talon walked beside her, his expression focused and determined. He had been instrumental in their survival so far, but Mira couldn't help but wonder if he was holding something back. The knowledge that Genesis was not just a technology but a sentient entity had changed everything. They were no longer just explorers, they were caretakers of something far more powerful and unpredictable than they had ever imagined. As they entered the control center, the room bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow from the consoles lining the walls. Mira took a deep breath. "Talon, show us how to activate the pulse." Talon moved to the central console, his hands hovering over the controls. The interface responded to his presence, symbols and patterns shifting as if recognizing their ancient master. "Once activated, the pulse will take a few moments to build up to full strength," he explained. "It will disable everything within a 10-kilometer radius, ships, weapons, even the city's systems. We must be prepared for the consequences." Mira nodded, her gaze shifting to Dr. Jonas Reeve, who stood nearby, monitoring the readings on his portable device. "Reeve, how long do we have before the Seekers regroup?" "Not long," Reeve replied grimly. "We're picking up movement from their ships, they're getting ready for another assault. We need to act fast." Myra's jaw tightened as she turned back to Talon. "Do it." Talon's fingers danced over the controls, and the room was filled with a low, resonant hum. The lights in the chamber dimmed slightly as the energy pulse began to build, the air growing thick with anticipation. Mira could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the enormity of what they were about to do. "Everyone, get ready," she called out to her team, who were scattered throughout the control center, their expressions tense but resolute. "We have to be prepared for whatever happens next." The pulse was reaching critical mass, the growing louder and more intense with each passing second. Myra's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the energy build, the air crackling with raw power. This was it, the moment that would decide their fate. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled violently, and a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. The pulse flared, sending out a wave of energy that radiated outward from the core, sweeping through the city and beyond. The walls shook, and the lights flickered as the pulse expanded, its reach extending far beyond the city's boundaries. Mira braced herself against the console as the shockwave passed through them, a surge of power that left her momentarily breathless. The pulse was immense, overwhelming in its intensity, and for a moment, it seemed as if the entire city might collapse under the strain. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the pulse subsided, leaving the chamber in an eerie, almost oppressive silence. The lights dimmed, and the hum of the Genesis core faded to a faint, distant echo. Myra's ears rang in the aftermath, her vision swimming as she struggled to regain her bearings. She glanced around the room, seeing her team slowly rising to their feet, their expressions a mix of shock and relief. "Status report," Mira called out, her voice hoarse. Reeve was the first to respond, his hands moving over his device as he checked the readings. "It worked," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "The pulse disabled everything, the Seeker ships, their weapons, even our own systems are down." Mira let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They had succeeded, the Seekers had been stopped, at least for the moment. But the cost had been high. The city's defenses were down, their ships were grounded, and they were now stranded in the heart of an ancient, sentient city with no way to call for help. Talon approached her, his expression somber. "The pulse has bought us time, but we are vulnerable. The Seekers will recover eventually, and when they do, they will come for us with everything they have." Mira nodded, her mind racing with the implications of their situation. They had achieved a temporary victory, but it had left them exposed, surrounded by an enemy that would stop at nothing to claim Genesis for themselves. "What do we do now?" Reeve asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Mira glanced at the darkened consoles, the silence of the city weighing heavily on her. "We need to find a way to communicate with Genesis," she said, her voice firm. "If it's truly sentient, then it must have some way of interacting with us, some way of understanding our intentions." Talon's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope in his gaze. "There is a way," he said slowly. "A chamber deep within the city, a place where the creators of Genesis once communed with the entity. If we can reach it, we may be able to establish a connection." Myra's heart skipped a beat. This was their chance, their only chance to unlock the true potential of Genesis and protect it from those who would misuse it. "Lead the way," she said, her voice resolute. "Let's finish this." As the team prepared to venture deeper into the city, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something far greater and far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The pulse had given them a brief reprieve, but the true battle for Genesis was only just beginning. And in the shadows of the ancient city, something was stirring, awakening from a slumber that had lasted millennia, ready to face those who sought to control its power. Chapter 8, The Heart of Genesis. The journey to the heart of the lost city was long and arduous, the ancient corridors twisting and turning in ways that defied logic and reason. The bioluminescent veins that lined the walls pulsed with a dim, rhythmic light, casting eerie shadows as the Aurora team pressed forward. Dr. Mira Lawson led the way, her mind racing with the possibilities of what they might find at their destination. Talon walked beside her, his expression focused and intense. The further they ventured into the depths of the city, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. It was as if the very air around them was charged with an unseen energy, a presence that seemed to grow stronger with every step. "We're close," Talon said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Chamber of Communion lies just ahead." Mira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment they had been racing towards since they first set foot on this planet. The chance to communicate with Genesis, to understand its true nature, and to find a way to protect it from the Seekers. As they rounded a final corner, the corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. The walls were lined with intricate carvings, the symbols glowing faintly with a soft, ethereal light. At the center of the chamber stood a massive, crystalline structure, its surface smooth and reflective, like a pool of liquid glass. The air hummed with a low, resonant frequency, vibrating through their bones. "This is it," Kalen said, his voice reverent. "The Chamber of Communion." Mira stepped forward, her eyes drawn to the crystalline structure. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, both beautiful and terrifying in its complexity. The surface seemed to ripple as she approached, as if reacting to her presence. "How does it work?" Reeve asked, his voice filled with awe. Kalen gestured to the structure. "The communion is established through a direct connection with the mind. The crystal will attune itself to the consciousness of whoever seeks to commune with Genesis. But be warned, Genesis is sentient, and it may not react kindly to those it deems unworthy." Mira took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "What do we need to do?" Kalen's expression was serious. "One of you must step forward and place your hand on the crystal. It will establish a link with your mind, allowing you to communicate directly with Genesis. But be prepared, the experience can be overwhelming. Genesis's consciousness is vast, and it may attempt to overwhelm yours." Mira looked around at her team, her gaze finally settling on Reeve. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. Reeve's eyes widened. "Are you sure? We don't know what it could do to you." Mira nodded. "I'm the leader of this mission. If anyone's going to take this risk, it should be me." Kalen inclined his head in a gesture of respect. "Very well. When you're ready, place your hand on the crystal and focus your thoughts." Mira stepped forward, her heart pounding as she reached out toward the crystalline structure. The surface was cool to the touch, smooth and almost liquid in its texture. As she pressed her hand against it, she felt a jolt of energy surge through her body, a connection forming between her mind and the entity that lay within the crystal. The chamber around her seemed to fade away, replaced by a vast, infinite void. Stars and galaxies swirled in the distance, and Mira felt as if she were floating in the depths of space itself. But she was not alone, there was something else here, something ancient and powerful, watching her from the darkness. "Who are you?" The voice echoed in her mind, vast and resonant, filling her consciousness with its presence. "Why have you come?" Mira struggled to find her voice, her thoughts swirling in the overwhelming presence of Genesis. "I am Mira Lawson," she said, her voice trembling. "I've come to understand you, to protect you from those who would misuse your power." "Protect?" The voice was both curious and skeptical. "Many have come before you, seeking to control me, to bend me to their will. What makes you different?" Mira felt a surge of determination. "I don't want to control you. I want to understand you, to learn from you. My people, humanity, has made mistakes in the past, but we can change. We can grow. I believe that with your help, we can create a better future." There was a long, tense silence, and for a moment, Mira feared that Genesis would reject her. But then, slowly, the presence seemed to shift, its vast consciousness brushing against hers like a gentle breeze. "You speak with sincerity," Genesis said, its voice softening. "I see in you a desire for knowledge, for growth. But know this, Mira Lawson, my power is not to be taken lightly. Those who seek to misuse it will face consequences beyond their understanding." Mira nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "I understand. But there are those who are coming, seekers who wish to use your power for their own ends. We need your help to stop them." The presence of Genesis seemed to grow, its consciousness expanding around her, filling the void with its immense power. "The Seekers are a threat to the balance of the universe," it said, its voice tinged with anger. "They seek to control that which they cannot comprehend. But they will not succeed." Mira felt a surge of hope. "Will you help us?" There was a pause, and then Genesis's voice echoed through her mind, filled with resolve. "Yes. I will help you." But you must be prepared to face the consequences of your actions. The balance must be maintained, and there will be a price to pay. Mira nodded, her mind clear. We're ready. The connection between them began to fade, and Mira felt herself being pulled back to the chamber, the crystalline structure slowly coming back into focus. She staggered slightly as the connection was severed, her mind reeling from the intensity of the experience. Reeve was at her side in an instant, steadying her. Mira, are you all right? What happened? Mira took a deep breath, her thoughts still racing. Genesis, it's agreed to help us. But we need to be prepared. It's going to unleash its full power against the Seekers, and we'll have to deal with the aftermath. Talon's expression was grim. Then we have no time to waste. We must return to the surface and prepare for the final confrontation. Mira nodded, her resolve firm. They had come too far to turn back now. The final battle for Genesis was about to begin, and they would need every ounce of strength and determination to see it through. As they made their way back through the twisting corridors of the Lost City, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that the true challenge was yet to come. They had awakened a power beyond comprehension, and now they had to ensure that it was used wisely. But even as they prepared for the coming battle, Mira knew that the choices they made in the next few hours would shape the future of not just the Lost City, but the entire universe. Chapter 9, The Final Confrontation. The trek back to the surface felt like a march toward destiny. The corridors of the Lost City, once mysterious and foreboding, now seemed to pulse with a sense of urgency. The bioluminescent veins along the walls glowed brighter, almost as if the city itself was preparing for what was to come. Dr. Mira Lawson led her team with unwavering resolve, her mind still reeling from her encounter with Genesis. The entity's power was immense, its consciousness vast beyond comprehension. Yet, it had agreed to help them, but at a cost. The weight of that knowledge pressed heavily on her, but there was no turning back now. Talon walked beside her, his expression grim but determined. We have little time, he said, his voice low. The Seekers will soon realize that the pulse was only a temporary setback. They will come at us with everything they have. Mira nodded, her thoughts focused on the task ahead. We need to position ourselves strategically, she said, her voice firm. If Genesis is going to unleash its power, we have to be ready to protect ourselves from the fallout. Reaching the surface, they found the landscape eerily silent. The sky was a swirling mass of dark clouds, casting an ominous shadow over the ruins of the city. The air was thick with tension, as if the very planet was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Get the defense systems online, Mira ordered, turning to Reeve and the other technicians. We need to create a barrier around the core chamber, something that can absorb the energy without causing collateral damage. Reeve nodded, his hands moving swiftly over the controls. I'm on it. But it's going to be tricky, this kind of energy is unpredictable. We'll need to reinforce the barriers as much as we can. As the team worked to prepare the defenses, Mira scanned the horizon, her eyes narrowing as she spotted movement in the distance. The Seekers were on the move, their dark, angular ships cutting through the storm clouds like knives. They were approaching fast, their intent clear. They're coming, Talon said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. We must act now. Mira turned to him, her gaze steady. Are you ready for this? Talon hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Yes. But know this, Mira, once Genesis's power is unleashed, there will be no going back. The balance of this world, perhaps even the universe, will be forever altered. Myra's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve was unshakable. We don't have a choice. The Seekers can't be allowed to control Genesis. Whatever the cost, we have to stop them. Talon inclined his head in agreement. Then let us begin. As the first of the Seeker ships descended toward the city, Mira and Talon made their way to the central platform, where the core chamber stood, a towering structure of crystal and metal that pulsed with an inner light. The energy within was immense, barely contained by the ancient technology that surrounded it. Talon raised his hands, his eyes glowing with a faint, ethereal light as he began to chant in the ancient language of his people. The air around them seemed to vibrate, the very ground trembling under the force of the energy being summoned. Genesis, hear my call, Talon intoned, his voice resonating with power. The time has come to awaken. Unleash your might and protect this world from those who would seek to destroy it. The core chamber responded, the crystalline structure flaring with a blinding light. The air crackled with raw energy, and Mira felt the ground beneath her feet shift as the power of Genesis began to surge outward. The Seeker ships opened fire, their weapons blazing as they unleashed a torrent of energy toward the city. But the defenses held, barely absorbing the impact and redirecting the energy back toward the attackers. The sky lit up with the exchange, a dazzling display of power and destruction. Talon's chant grew louder, more urgent, as the energy within the core reached its peak. Mira could feel the intensity of the power building, like a storm about to break. The very air was thick with it, crackling with electricity and the promise of something immense, something unstoppable. "Now, Mira!" Talon shouted, his voice strained with the effort of controlling the energy. "You must help me channel the power. Together, we can direct it at the Seekers, destroy them before they destroy us." Mira hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, placing her hands on the core's surface. A surge of energy shot through her, overwhelming her senses with its raw, primal force. It was like nothing she had ever experienced, a connection to something vast, something beyond the limits of human understanding. "Focus," Genesis's voice echoed in her mind, both a command and a reassurance. "I will guide you." Mira closed her eyes, her thoughts aligning with the consciousness of Genesis. Together with Talon, she directed the energy, channeling it through the core and outward toward the Seeker ships. The force of it was staggering, a beam of pure, unadulterated power that cut through the sky like a blade. The Seeker ships were caught in the blast, their shields failing almost instantly as the energy wave tore through them. One by one, the ships exploded in brilliant bursts of light, their debris raining down on the desolate landscape below. The power of Genesis was unstoppable, its wrath unleashed upon those who dared to challenge it. But as the last of the Seeker ships fell from the sky, the energy within the core began to destabilize. The ground shook violently, cracks forming in the earth as the power threatened to spiral out of control. "Mira!" Talon shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "We have to stabilize it, or it will destroy everything." Mira fought to maintain her focus, but the power was too much, it was overwhelming her, threatening to consume her completely. She could feel Genesis's consciousness merging with hers, their minds becoming one as the energy surged. But then, just as she felt herself slipping away, a voice echoed through the chaos, familiar, comforting, strong. "You are not alone." It was Talon, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of energy. Together, they pushed back against the overwhelming force, stabilizing the core, bringing the power back under control. Slowly, the trembling ground stilled, the light from the core dimming as the energy subsided. The storm clouds above began to dissipate, revealing a sky tinged with the soft light of dawn. Mira collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the connection with Genesis faded. She felt exhausted, drained, but also triumphant. They had done it, they had stopped the Seekers and saved the city from destruction. Talon knelt beside her, his expression filled with both relief and sorrow. "It is done," he said quietly. "Genesis is safe, for now." Mira nodded weakly, her mind still reeling from the intensity of the experience. What happens now?" Talon's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first light of the new day was beginning to break. "The balance has been restored, but the cost was great. Genesis will remain dormant, its power sealed away until it is needed again. But we must be vigilant, the Seekers were only one threat. There will be others." Mira took a deep breath, the weight of their victory settling on her shoulders. "We'll be ready." As the sun rose over the lost city, casting its golden light over the ancient ruins, Mira knew that their journey was far from over. The battle for Genesis had been won, but the struggle to protect it, to ensure that its power was never misused, would continue. And as long as they stood watch, the legacy of Genesis would endure. Chapter 10: A New Dawn. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the ruins of the lost city. The battle was over, and the silence that now blanketed the landscape felt almost surreal. The once chaotic and stormy sky was now calm, the storm clouds dissipating into nothingness. The only remnants of the fierce struggle were the smoldering wreckage of the seeker ships scattered across the barren plains. Dr. Mira Lawson stood at the edge of the central platform, gazing out at the scene before her. The weight of their victory settled heavily on her shoulders, mixed with the exhaustion of what they had just endured. The power of Genesis had been both their savior and their greatest challenge, and now it lay dormant once more, its energy sealed away deep within the core of the city. Kalen stood beside her, his gaze distant as he surveyed the horizon. The dawn light caught the edges of his armor, casting a faint glow that mirrored the first light of a new day. "The balance has been restored," Kalen said quietly, breaking the silence. "But the cost was great. Genesis will sleep again, its power sealed until it is needed once more." Mira nodded, her thoughts swirling with the enormity of what they had accomplished and what still lay ahead. "We've won today, but you're right. This isn't the end. The Seekers were only one threat. There'll be others, and we have to be ready for them." Kalen turned to her, his expression solemn. "You've proven yourself to Genesis, Mira. It recognized your strength, your desire to protect rather than control. That is why it aided us. But with that recognition comes responsibility. The legacy of Genesis is now intertwined with your own." Mira took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. She had come here as an explorer, seeking knowledge, seeking answers. But she was leaving as something more, a guardian, entrusted with the protection of something far greater than herself. "What will you do now?" Mira asked, her gaze shifting to Kalen. Kalen's eyes softened, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "My purpose has always been to protect Genesis, to ensure that its power is not misused. Now that it is safe once more, I will remain here, watching over it, ensuring that it is never awakened by those who seek to do harm." Mira nodded, understanding the weight of his duty. "And what about us? What should we do?" Kalen's expression became thoughtful. "Return to your people, Mira. Tell them what you have seen, what you have learned. The knowledge of Genesis should not be kept secret, but it must be shared wisely. Your people must understand the responsibility that comes with such power." Mira looked out at the horizon, the sun now fully risen, casting its light over the desolate landscape. "We will," she said softly. "We'll make sure that Genesis's legacy is one of hope, not destruction." As the day continued to brighten, the rest of the Aurora team gathered on the platform, their faces a mix of relief and quiet contemplation. They had survived, against all odds, and now it was time to return home, to share their story with the rest of humanity. But as they prepared to leave, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Genesis was more than just a relic of the past, it was a force, a living entity that had the potential to shape the future in ways they could barely comprehend. As they boarded the Aurora, Mira took one last look at the lost city, its ruins bathed in the warm light of the new day. The journey ahead would not be easy, and there would be many challenges to come. But she knew now, more than ever, that they had the strength to face them. The ship's engines hummed to life, and as they lifted off the ground, Mira felt a sense of closure, but also a sense of purpose. They had unlocked the secrets of Genesis, and now it was up to them to ensure that those secrets were used for the greater good. As the Aurora ascended into the sky, leaving the lost city behind, Mira looked to the future with a renewed sense of hope. The dawn of a new era was upon them, and with it came the responsibility to shape it wisely. And as long as they remembered the lessons of Genesis, she knew they would be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.